Hi everyone. This is a short, about 10-minute video that's going to kind of lead you into your first discussion question for this session, which is going to be on epigenetics. So we started reading about the nature versus nurture debate at the very beginning of this chapter, or at least alluded to it. And many of you have probably heard of this debate either in another class, or some of you may have not heard about this debate at all. But this is essentially one of the largest debates that has happened in psychology, particularly developmental psychology. It started all the way back in the days of Aristotle and Plato. But generally, we're looking at what plays a more important part in development, nature or nurture. So nature, of course, would refer to an individual's heredity, their DNA, or the genes within their DNA, so what you're born with and what you got from both of your parents, whereas nurture is going to refer to your environment or your experiences, your family, what things that have happened to you. So things that have happened since you've been born, or even the environment in utero. That's annoying. So some people used to think that only nature mattered. Only your genetics really mattered. You were born one way, and then it didn't really matter what happened after that. Your genes determined your destiny. Whereas the other side of the debate decided that nurture was the most important. John Locke described babies as tabula rasas, as blank slates. So they came in totally blank, and they were only impacted by their environment and the things that happened to them. Now, at this point in time, this debate of whether it has to be one or the other seems almost a little ridiculous, because we know that both of these are very important. So weighing which is more important than the other doesn't really make sense at this point. We know that both nature and nurture interact a great deal to influence development. So about 100 years ago, one of the famous quotes is, putting this debate into an analogy, which contributes more to the area of a rectangle, its length or its width? Well, of course, to calculate the area of a rectangle, you have to multiply both together, correct? So you can't take one without the other, and both of them are equally as important. So how I like to envision the effects of the environment and genetics on development is more like a tornado, okay? So say we've pitted heredity up here and environment over here. So again, this would be nature and nurture over here, okay? They're all up here in the clouds. These are the things that are contributing to this storm, okay? And then say up here, at the beginning of development, we have a baby, and then this is an adolescent down at the bottom, which is where we will end up at the end of this class. So the heredity and the environment are interacting a great deal even before a baby is born. So the genes and the environment can have a huge impact while the baby is developing in the womb, right? So we see a lot of these interactions are occurring even before the baby is born. And then after the baby is born, this tornado continues. So we see it sucking in things from both sides and mixing them all together, and each side is impacting the other. So we see that a person's heredity can come into this cascading storm and then come out to affect the environment that they're in. And then in turn, that environment that they've affected can come into the storm and get into this developmental cascade. And then it can even come back out, and that environment can affect heredity, which is what we'll focus on in a little bit. Now remember, when we talk about environment, we're talking about a number of different things. This is a snapshot of Bronfenbrenner's model that you learned. So the environment can go all the way from the things that are immediately outside of a child, all the way to the culture and the world that they're living in, being part of a part of the human experience. And we see that these bidirectional interactions are happening in this model also. Okay, so it's not so easy as to be nature or nurture. Heredity, both heredity and environment are impacting this person, and they're swooning together all throughout development. So at times it's very, very hard to parse these apart, and we'll learn this as we read through some of the research, through much of the research actually on development. It's very hard to isolate things because we can't really take individuals out of their environment. So looking more at this interaction that I alluded to, how might the environment come through this storm and impact someone's heredity? Well, And something that's pretty newly discovered, epigenetics, is something that was only discovered about 15 years ago, and has only been in the textbooks for about 10 and hasn't even made it into some of the textbooks yet. And after this short video, you will watch another short 2 videos, one on the scientist that discovered this in rats, of course, and then another short TED Talk that explains how epigenetics affect people throughout generations and how we can affect our own epigenome. So what is epigenetics? Literally translated, it means above the genome. So epi translates as above, and the genome being your DNA essentially and your genetics that were given to you. Defined, it's the study of changes in organisms that are caused by the modification of their gene expression rather than the alteration of the genetic code itself. So we are not changing our DNA, we are just changing which genes in our DNA are turned on or off. So we're born with these genes, but they can be active or inactive. And so what determines whether they are active or inactive depends on this epigenome. So this might make a little bit more sense if we look at a picture of it. Now, please keep in mind, I don't expect you on a test to be able to like memorize all of these words like the chromatin or the methyl group. I just want you to get a general understanding of this concept, okay? This is essentially a picture of the genome broken down into different parts, okay? So right here, we're going to focus on, this is what DNA looks like, right? And DNA is made up of lots of acids and stuff within that. And then once we unravel the DNA, you can see that DNA is actually, each strand is wrapped around these things that we call histones. They're like little balls. Okay, so the DNA wraps around these histones. And we're going to look at a little diagram next that makes it a little bit easier to understand. So we have, this is the DNA, this blue part wrapped around this big blue ball, which is a histone. You'll also see these little epigenetic factors, these little tags here, okay? So these little tags are telling the histone what to do. The histone can either wrap up the DNA around it, or it can unwrap the DNA from around it. So let's really quickly, this is a better illustration. If you guys want to play with this, it's really cool. They have a whole website. It's learn.genetics.utah.edu. This is their thing on epigenetics, and they have a couple different pages to play with if you're interested. So this is a closer up picture of what we were just looking at. Okay, so again, these blue things are histones, which are giant proteins that your DNA is wrapped around. And within these DNA are segments of genes. So from here to here is a gene, from here to here is a gene, from here to here. Okay, so these are connected genes. So right now we have them pretty much unwrapped. Okay, now here would be the opposite side of this. The histones are wrapping and wrapping and wrapping and wrapping up. Okay, so you can see that since it's so tightly wrapped up, none of this in this illustration, gold, is exposed. So since it is wrapped around the histone, that gene is turned off. It is not expressed because essentially it is wrapped up and put away. Now if we were to unwrap it and continue to unwrap it, we can see that, bam, right there, we've now started to express a gene. This is now a gene that is on. This is now a gene that is on, whereas these ones that are still wrapped up are still off. Okay, so these things floating around, in this diagram you have the methyl tag and the acetyl tag. These are the things that control your epigenetics. So essentially they latch on to these little histones. They've got little parking spots there, and they tell the histone to either wrap or unwrap. And the thing is that these tags that are affecting our epigenetics, we are exposed to it. And so our epigenetics can change depending on our environment. So let's look at that next. We'll go back. Okay, so again, this is similar to what we just saw. So what can affect your epigenetics? What can affect whether your epigenetics decides to unwrap certain genes or wrap up other genes? So again, if a gene is wrapped up and it is turned off and it is not expressed, then that gene has no effect on you. Um, so say you have a gene for cancer. If it remains wrapped up and never expresses itself, you will never develop cancer. So lifestyle factors can have a large effect on our epigenetics. So diet and or obesity. So diet was the way that, as you'll see in the video, the scientist discovered epigenetics. He changed the diet in a certain type of rat and turned off one of the genes that made it prone to obesity and heart disease. Physical activity can affect your epigenetics. Tobacco smoking, which is essentially a pollutant, alcohol consumption, or any other drug consumption for that matter. Caffeine has a huge effect on epigenetics, actually. Environmental pollutants, of course, stress, sleep, okay? So our lifestyle and the things that we're exposing our body to can have a positive and or negative effect on our epigenetics. And this epigenome is incredibly sensitive during pregnancy. So the things that the mother is consuming and is exposed to can have a very significant effect on the epigenome of the developing baby. Your epigenetics may also mutate to chance. So some changes may not be directly due to environmental stimuli. And once you've changed your epigenetics, that change will be passed down through your generation. So it is genetic, but then once it gets down to the next generation, it is again prone to being changed in a positive or negative way due to environmental factors. So in a lot of the great talks we see about epigenetics, a lot of them say you are what your grandmother ate. Your diet has a huge effect on genetics, and what your mother or your grandmother ate, unless you have gone through and changed that epigenome after that fact, will be passed down to you. Okay, so we're going to watch two more short videos on this and kind of get a better understanding of the concept in general. And then at the end of this discussion question, it's going to follow with some specific prompts to get you to discuss and explain this concept in your own words.